So then the problem becomes, why do we do it? Why do we have this constant, these new things that we make and that we posit as things to make us happier or powerful or whatever. And I too, I'm the same way. I have these same feelings, and I think that this is a good thing in a way, because this dissatisfaction keeps us moving and doing new things and all that. But on the other hand, we're never going to be happier. And
we're never going to be happier than we are now, or
I would say so.
There's kind of a quantitative totality to happiness.
I know.
It's a limited amount.
Okay, where it's well, the thing, I don't know. I have a feeling that we're not built to be happy all the time. I suppose that somebody who's a slave or those camps or whatever may be very unhappy. But I think that happiness, we're not built for it particularly. I think that in some ways that's very good. But I think that it still is not comfortable. But I don't think we were ever promised comfortability.
Comfortability, is that a word? Comfortability.
It can be. Sure, it is now.
You Americans, you just
I do declare it.
so.
By the powers invested in me as a doctorate of philosophy and English.
Lewis Carroll started it.
Lewis
Lewis Carroll started it.
Lewis
What about Shakespeare?
Fair play.
Fog.
You're agreeing with Richard
Yeah.
about happiness? We're not built to be happy.
Yeah, and what you said, happiness not being a quantifiable thing, so like, it's not quantifiable, but how can we be more happy? It's just that we want to be happy and comfortable. It's more of a percentage of our daily lives. Oh, you're just being an animal, you're not supposed to be comfortable all the time. You're hiding, you're building a fire, taking care of yourself, you're happy all the time and you're just content, just sitting there content, you're kind of this in the food chain or outside of natural cycling. But that's what I just want to say. That, but I also wanted to get to the whole humanity and technology thing. I think we have this weird idea, we had this weird idea for the longest time that what set us apart from all the animals, all the other ones, is that we use tools. And we're finding more and more animals like gorillas, you can stick the stick in and get the ants. And so we look at like how much tools can we make to be human before we lose our humanity. And I don't see what the big deal is. I think technology is just a thing that exists. Like, say you were walking up to a gorilla and it was setting sticks up against a tree, and you put some more sticks against the tree. Would be like, we say that our humanity is reflected in our objects. We make them more like we need to, but it's not humanity that, it's humanity of gorillas that made us what we need to. So, I guess I'm trying to say like it's not just, humanity is not the only animal that can make technology. Technology is the thing that happens when intelligence tries to manipulate the world.
Well, Stella raised some of those issues last time. We started on that discussion last time.
I am going to comment on some of these things. I'll try to kind of show you a little something about this kind of conversation in a second. But first, Rick and Brian, my names are Matt, and then Brian, and then we'll circle that around.
Do you guys think that like acquisition, like the process of acquiring knowledge affects intelligence in process of like learning something or reading a book, like spending weeks on a book reading it, the environments you're reading it in, and how you associate like, those memories of reading it with learning, like the information that's in it. Compared to like something like, if you look at something like The Matrix, where you just downloads come to it with mind, it's like, I know that. It's like, okay, really, it was a process of you going through to learn that. Whereas some people spend a lifetime to master something like that. And the experiences they have to acquire knowledge will affect the actual intelligence. So I guess what we're trying to relate this to is, artificial intelligence. Like we can, I think we do have the ability to like build Google can build a brain. But all right, so how's it acquiring knowledge? I mean, it's one thing to read a news article in Iraq, right? You're learning about it, and there's another. And then there can also be a war. There's so many ways to acquire knowledge and to have intelligence. So we build this computer that has these amazing capabilities. How is it actually acquiring knowledge? How is it using that knowledge?
How is what?
Artificial intelligence, right? The greatest AI being, but how is it actually acquiring knowledge? Just instant input? Everything is instant those things? You know what I mean? Like, how does that affect it? How much it actually knows it? You know what I mean? Like,
That's the question we keep asking. Yeah. Same question.
Going back to the idea that we want to build to be happy, which I sort of find being ludicrous. I mean, we're chemically able to be happy. We're built to be happy. Maybe not all the time. We weren't built to be, like a Lewis-speed society of happiness all the time. But to say that we weren't built to be happy just seems, ignorant.
Pessimistic.
Pessimistic. It's in our chemistry. I would say that we might feel that it's harder. It's getting harder and harder to be happy because we have so much greater access to things. But it's like having access to more choices, and you're going to be more fine-tuned in what will make you happy, as opposed to if you just had one or two choices. So with more choices comes more issues, and what makes you happy is going to be more specified. So I wouldn't say that we're getting more unhappy as a society. It's just we have more choices as to what will make us happy.
Hold on. We're just sort of moving this way across the room now, so you're next.
Well, kind of like along those lines, I mean, people in society always have to compete against each other. We're always trying to struggle to be better than the other person or to have more, and that kind of harkens back to like, early humans where you had to be the most fit person. The most life always seems to be about mating with the most success and spreading your traits. And like along those lines of being happy is that it's always kind of a struggle to keep up with everyone else. So when people are able to start like installing a chip in your brain so you can do math instantly, and they're doing better in like school and stuff, that there's always going to be these really hard issues that arise as we get more advanced, and everyone has to keep up with each other as we keep moving forward.
But we're already having these conversations in all sorts of ways. Should we let these conversations have been going on for years with educators and knowledge. Should we let students use calculators? Because it affects the process of learning, it changes how we learn. Should we let people use mobile phones in the classrooms? Should we do that? And should we let them have a chip in their brain that does the mathematics? I mean, it's the same question over and over. These questions are still on.
So, will there be any resolution to these questions, or are we just, kind of stuck with the repetition?
We make decisions, but they're usually political, social, cultural decisions.
So the decision is one that happens over time.
It happens over time, and we get empirical evidence of how things work, and we make decisions. A child has to sit a maths test without a calculator early on to learn arithmetic. And then we let them use calculators when they learn algebra.
There's probably an argument to be made there that that's kind of a laissez-faire attitude. What happens, happens. A lot of people who have a politically informed approach will say, well, we shouldn't just let the markets determine what happens. So we shouldn't just let history or trends shape us. We should have some kind of more dynamic way of responding to those situations. And that's always going to be a creative tension, I think, between saying, well, things will either happen or they won't, versus to some extent we can shape things. And these are arguments that are relative. But some people will privilege, as you're doing in your answer, kind of an historical answer. We'll see what happens. Other people, and I think Gabriel is sort of in this mode, right? When you're posing questions, you're constantly thinking about something like a human essence. And that you, in some sense, the way you're asking your questions, you want something like this human essence to persist. And you seem to be kind of, and rightly so, and the people who think like you, I think, feel the same way. See if I'm understanding you.
This is not even right, because we give a purpose to technology and computer because we can't find a purpose for ourselves. Personally.
Okay, so bear with me here a little bit. So the kind of answer that you're looking for, the kind of answer that you want, I think is fundamentally different from the kind of answer that Damien is fashioning. Okay, so somebody like William James would say, well, what's the division? What's the thing that divides your way of seeing things and, say, Damien's way of seeing things? James would say it's temperament. So William James, in a famous essay, says that real philosophical differences are differences between two kinds of temperaments, what he calls the tough-minded temperament and the tender-minded temperament. He doesn't mean anything negative by either one of those terms. But a tough-minded person tends to be empirical, tends to be historical, tends to say, let's see what actually happens. Let's make judgments on the basis of what our senses and what we can measure about the world let us know. That kind of an empirical mode, almost in extreme ways, a positivist kind of philosophy. But the tender-minded thinker, according to William James, is somebody who's rational, who privileges acts of definition, who thinks about the world as accessible through our reason and knowable. And therefore, because it is accessible through our reason and knowable, some people who fit this category will often assume that that the nature of everything, the being of beings, right, that is stable, unchanging, and fixed.
Before we move on from this, can you position Minsky and Searle in this?
I can't. Minsky and Searle are probably both tough-minded.
Okay.
Okay, they're probably both on that side of the
division. Okay.
But I'd be reluctant to do it without actually, if I had a quotation by Searle and one by Minsky, then I might be able to say this is more tender-minded, this is more tough-minded.
Okay.
Okay. But these are, for James, these differences are not a matter of ideas; they're a matter of mood or temperament. Some of us just find ourselves in the world predisposed to be tough-minded. And others, so James argues, I'm not holding this position myself. Others say, no, we find ourselves in the world where we think that there's a mystical unity and a oneness to everything. Those would be the tender-minded types. Other people say, no, the world is chaotic and confused, and a lot of things just happen throughout, like in the Darwinian approach, just through absolute chance. Right? So, the problem with that conception is the concept of absoluteness might be a tender-minded concept. But anyway, so part of what is underlying some of the discussion is that imagine that we have several semiotic squares that we talked about before. Okay? And what we're actually after in a discussion like this is we're asking ourselves the question, what are humans in relationship to machines? Right? And so we struggle with the vocabulary because we say something like, a human being is somebody who is governed by reason. Well, what's the opposite of reason? We might say it's feeling. And then there's non-feeling and the absence of reason, non-reason. But other people come by and say, no, I don't think what really makes us human is reason. What makes us human is, it's not exactly our capacity to reason, it's this sense, if everything is stable and if we're in this sort of tender-minded moment where we think being is permanent and unchanging, it only appears to change, and insofar as being is permanent and unchanging, it must be at some point totally knowable, right? Then maybe instead of privileging reason and the capacity, the ability to puzzle through something, maybe when we say what really makes us human is this ability to know something or to know everything. So earlier in the evening, you made a wonderful comment where you said something like, if a machine and humans together can know everything, and if we can make that part of our humanity, then we wouldn't be human anymore, right? Some statement along those lines. Basically, what's happening in a discussion like this is that we're not agreeing, or there's a dispute over what aspect of, let's call it thought, is the real defining aspect of our humanity. Does that make any sense? So what we can do, if we're careful and patient enough, we can map out various other possibilities here. Richard, what makes us human is the pursuit of happiness, whether or not we can ever achieve it. So we have in our own government, in our own founding documents, this phrase, the pursuit of happiness, implying that maybe that's really what it is that makes us human. It's not what we can know or what we can feel, right? It's that dissatisfaction that's always making us reach out for something in the hope that it will be satisfying or complete us in some way. Is this working for you? So what we can do is we can begin to see that what we have are many different competing senses of the human, and we can start to gain some. If we don't get any answers, at least we can begin to understand with more. We can hear better. We can discern better. Sort of what's at stake in the conversation. So a number of you want to ask questions, so I'll stop. Hang on, Tom, you've been waiting for a while.
Yeah, to respond to what Richard was saying, if I remember correctly from Psych 100, one of the things that was posed there was it's not an equation for happiness. It's not numerical or anything, but it's happiness equals circumstances plus set values plus voluntary actions. And the set value is essentially like a general area, like a general, not number, but spot of happiness that we more or less trickle down to. So they use the example of a chronically depressed woman who has, like 5 kids and wins the lottery. She's really happy for a while. She has all that money and everything, but eventually, all of that happiness kind of goes back to normal, and she's back to being chronically depressed. So, like in some respect, yeah, like we can't eternally. We don't have necessarily this capacity for always being happy. And I think if we did, then then we basically live in that episode of The Twilight Zone where the guy dies and all of a sudden gets everything he wants and asks, "Am I in heaven?" And the guy helping him says, "What makes you think you're in heaven?" It's that sort of thing of I totally agree that part of what makes us human is, yes, we can look for happiness, yes, we can pursue it, but we don't necessarily have it all the time. And, there's something scary about it.
One traditional philosophical response to the observations you're making would be, well, the fact that we don't have it all the time implies something fundamental about our humanity. That is, that we're never finished, that there's something always eternal about the very nature of our human. So it's really a problem not so much of a state, right? It's a problem of temporality.
So could that be another semantic square of temporality?
It could, yes, certainly, yeah, right. That human beings are those kinds of beings that are preoccupied with the future, right? Where future temporality dominates over past and present modes of time.
Yeah, I think I would say, just coming from a psych standpoint, an ego psych, what is more evolutionary advantageous, being happy now, or being, like you said, primarily preoccupied with making happiness for yourself in the future and creating opportunities for yourself in the future? What's going to advance the species over time? Any species. It doesn't have to be humans. It could just be any species that wants to survive into the future. It's more advantageous to be future-minded than now-minded.
Now, if you're following me here, one of the things that we could then do to extend and complicate this argument would be to say, well, one of the ways in which we talk about being human is to conceive of ourselves as a species. Okay? However, one of the potential challenges of this post-human transhumanism development that we're watching is that maybe if we become part, whatever it is we are now, and something else that we're identifying with machines, that maybe that interaction would produce a different kind of definition. Maybe the concept of a species will only work for living systems, Okay, so once we start to augment those living systems with things that are non-living systems, notice I'm not saying non-alive, I'm just saying they don't conform to the previous vocabulary about what constitutes an organic system, an evolving system. So what we might argue there is, while it might be a useful conversation to have about how a species might evolve in a technogenetic kind of way, right? At the same time, that too would be yet another one of these semiotic systems. Okay. Now, one of the things that is fun to think about is if you're thinking from Gabriel's point of view, what I was calling the tender-minded sort of view that wants to think about everything as united and stable, right? Then it might be the case if we achieve totality, is that kind of a self-annihilating realization? But what if instead everything that is always radically becoming, right? Therefore, there'd be never any attempt, any chance to ever know everything. So the fantasy of having total knowledge and total, perfect, pure, unmediated access to total knowledge, that's kind of that would be a scenario that would not be sustained in a cosmos where everything is always radically becoming and unstable.
It was Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, who said there is a theory that if ever we understand everything about the universe reorders itself.
Yes,
and sets itself into a more complex mechanism.
Yeah.
And then he wrote, there are many people who believe this has happened multiple times already.
It's wonderful. Yeah. It's a variation on what Nietzsche meant by the eternal return of the same. Nietzsche performed a thought experiment, and when he was writing Beyond the Good and Evil, I think is when it first appears, the fourth book. And he said, what if we just did a thought experiment? He was thinking about Socrates. At the moment he was about ready to take the hemlock, Socrates said to his good friend, Crito, I think, he said, pay the doctor, give Asclepius a booster, pay the doctor. I'm finally sick, I'm finally going to be cured of this thing called life. And Nietzsche said, boy, what a terrible thought to have, that Socrates is having at that moment, that life is some kind of an illness, it's something to be rid of. And so Nietzsche comes up with this idea, it's kind of a thought experiment. He says, what if there was an infinite amount of time and a finite amount of matter? Okay, if that's the case, then if there's an infinite amount of time and a finite amount of matter, it might take a long time, but that matter would have to rearrange itself so that it repeats this very moment that you and I are in, infinitely. Okay? And he said, can we imagine a kind of human being that says yes to that situation, right? That embraces life as it is, right? Knowing that it's going to come around again.
The cold quantum physicist.
Yeah. So you'll be sitting here in this room with me forever. When it comes around again, we're here with Damien, so that's a little bit better. So okay, I know you guys want to join in.
There might be an exception to that, because
To which? To the Nietzsche's thought experiment? There's lots of problems with it. It's just a thought experiment.
because people, we put value on expectations. We have sense internally about markets, people like markets are determined by expectations, large, very large. We expect to get a degree when we go to school. We expect we're going to get a paycheck before we work. We put a lot of value on expectations. And it's kind of related to what we said about constantly reaching, for satisfaction. We expect certain outcomes. So we're constantly moving forward with them. So if we're at a certain state of mind or happiness or life, and we're very happy and we expect to stay that way, then that expectation would be good enough for us to want to stay in that state. Right? So we could have totality. We might look there. I mean,
we at least have
$1 billion. I hope this money never goes away, and we expect that we always
We at least
have.
have the wish for it.
Right. And we're an
Right,
expectation.
whether or not, right, but it usually will turn out to not be the case.
We're right, because we can't actually have, it's not as thoughts, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're expecting to maintain at a certain level.
There are two different kinds of temporality that you want to factor into a discussion of this kind. And that is that there's a future that's very predictable, right? You kind of know where you're going to be in half an hour, right? You have some sense about what tomorrow's, what you have to do to get through the day tomorrow, right? But then there's the future that is completely unexpected. They're the things that will happen that none of us ever imagined happening. Or maybe I know something's going to happen and you don't yet know it. So I've planned for it, and so it's predictable in my world, but it's not predictable in yours. Okay? So there's different ways in which the future can be either something that we can more or less manage, right? Can manage our expectations in that context. But there's also these other things that happen. And you remember the movie Jaws, right? That shark, right? That terrorizes East Coast Resort. You think about the way Jaws is this sort of predictable thing. There are sharks out in the ocean. We know there are sharks out there. So if I plan to go swimming on my summer vacation, I might factor in, where the sharks are. But then there's that unexpected shark, right, that just comes out of nowhere and shatters your sense of what's stable, what's secure, what's reliable. And Lacanians call that shattering experience. It happens when someone unexpectedly dies, for example. Right? They call that shattering experience the intrusion of the real. Okay? It's not reality. The intrusion of the real shatters our predictable sense of reality. So reality is something constructed on this view, out of all these expectations as you're describing them, or the language that we use to sort of shape our sense of the world as it has been, as it persists, and as it will be. But then something often comes around. Like think about the earthquake that hit Japan. Right? People built those tsunami walls 30 feet high, knowing that tsunamis are going to be about that high. If we want to, so what was the unexpected thing, right? That the earthquake would be so powerful that it would drop the seacoast 3 feet. So the 30-foot wall was now 27 feet. The tsunami wave was 30. So the nuclear power reactors lose their energy, lose their electricity, and so on. So there's always going to be something that shatters, right? And it's that intrusion of the shattering of the real that just smashes and makes a mess of reality. And that's why it's a little hard to understand people in my field, because a lot of times we think of the real and the reality as synonymous terms, right? But I'm actually using them as radically opposite terms. And so I'll stop there.
Well, I just wanted to talk about the assignment very quickly. Now, Patrick's told us all about how to destroy the real.
Well, no, the real destroys reality.
The real destroys reality.
I don't know how to destroy the real.
That's actually, I did read about that in one of the readings, and I didn't quite get it as clearly as you described it there. It's made it a bit clearer. But I wanted to just mention the assignment briefly. I have a, excuse me, something I'd like you all to do. I'm logged in as a teacher, but I presume as a student you can go in and you can see your own user groups, can't you? Yeah? What I'd like you to do is, if you click on the groups, you actually go in to a kind of area for that group, and anything you do in here is only within that group. So you can create pages, create a discussion, do anything, and only people in that group are involved. I think that's how it works. I've not used this properly yet myself. So what I'd really like you to do for the next class is all of you have something in here, and at the very minimum have your question. But it may be an idea to also start some kind of discussion of things you're going to talk about and start using this area a little bit. And the nice thing about putting it in here is we can talk about it in class as well, about the questions you're talking about. That sound okay? So by the next class, have something so that we can start the discussions around these topics next week. Okay? And I'll see you guys next week.